Are you ready?
Hello, and welcome to the Whole House Podcast, where you can find home, health, and family all in one place. Our team is comprised of moms from different upbringings and backgrounds, and we each have different passions and giftings and strengths. We each represent a different room, and we all make up the whole house. So grab a cup of coffee and join our overly caffeinated ladies here for the Whole House Podcast. Right. Hi, and welcome to the Whole House Podcast. Today it's Carly,
Kathleen,
Audrey,
and we're really excited to have Audrey here today. We'll tell you who she is in just a second. But first, what's your favorite flavor yogurt?
coconut, definitely coconut.
Mine is just vanilla.
banana.
Ew, you guys.
You said banana.
You guys both have my least favorite flavor. Okay, that was funny. All right, so today we're here to get Audrey's take on the Guire Adoption story. And we're excited because I think we had a really fun time the last time getting Amory's story. So, a little bit, Audrey is Kathleen's oldest daughter, and now I will let you tell about yourself.
Okay, my name is Audrey Simmons. I'm the oldest of the Guire 7, and I am married and now have 5 kids of my own. My oldest are 7-year-old twins. I have a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 6-month-old, and we homeschool in Western Maryland.
Wow, that's a lot.
It's a lot of kids. But you grew up in a family of 7,
Yeah,
so it's not that many.
I tell people that I have 5, which sounds like a lot to some people, but still feels like my mom took some of them to the store with her. Like I haven't reached my cap yet. I should probably also mention at least 2 of mine, probably 4 of them, are on the autism spectrum. So we have a lot of experience with sensory play and schedules and therapy and doing things like letting the kids wear earmuffs in church service because the music is too loud. And we're fortunately at a good church and we haven't yet been asked to leave.
So a little bit, we do want to say that Kathleen's book, A Positive Adoption Story, has been re-released with a study guide in the back, and we're excited to offer that to you. Even if you have the old book, this new one has a new cover and the study guide, which is really helpful for group studies or...
Right, if you run a support group and you want to do a study together, all the questions are there. And not only that, if you like aesthetics, it's got a really pretty green door on the front now.
I really like the
and
new
green's
cover.
my favorite color.
Yeah, I think the new cover really pops. It looks really, really sharp.
Yeah, we had a couple ladies come over to our booth at the craft fair just because of the cover of that book. She said, I was just really drawn to that cover, and I didn't even know what the book was about, so I had to come and see.
Doors are good symbolism, too.
Yes.
Yeah. So with our last interview story about the adoption, we kind of started pre-adoption. Mm-hmm. So I talked about when I asked Kathleen about like when they knew they were going to adopt, like when they got the placement call, that kind of stuff. So could you start, where is the first thing you remember about the adoption? And how old were you?
Oh, man, I must have been 10 or 11 when they started talking about it. And I don't remember a conversation where they sat down and told me or asked me. But I remember from around that point, it's just sort of like a hazy, like, I knew that's what we were doing. I think the first really vivid memory I have that was like an actual specific memory was I was 11 and we got a call from the adoption coordinator asking if we would consider a sibling group instead of one. And I remember being in Ponderosa eating lunch.
That's right.
When my dad came out to the table from his office to say that he had just gotten off the phone and to ask my mom, and we were like in the middle of eating. But that's the first thing I actually like specifically remember with details with a place involved instead of just a thing I knew was happening.
I think what's really cool about Audrey being the age and stage she was is she was old enough to kind of get what was going on, but she was also so excited about adding to her family in that way. She never really questioned, like, oh my goodness, is this weird or not? And I just want her to tell, she had a couple dreams that I wrote down.
I had a dream that we got boys that were really close in age, that they were almost, You need to go out. It's a microphone.
It's a microphone. It's picking you up right now.
We're talking. We're recording a show, so you need to go watch the movie and hang out, and we'll come out in a couple minutes. Thank you.
Yeah, you're not really supposed to call me
that.
Harley. You're supposed to call me Mama, and you're supposed to be quiet also. So I'll see you in a little bit.
Life with kids.
See you in a little bit. No more.
So, I had a dream that we adopted 2 boys that were almost like twins. But I knew that they weren't twins in the dream. They were just almost like twins. And that there was a little girl. And I had that one dream that was 3 of them. And then I had 2 other dreams that I remember about a baby. I remember that we got a baby and not knowing if he was a boy or a girl. And then I had another dream that we were in the dream eating together with family at Ponderosa again. And we had a baby in a high chair, and my aunt had a baby girl in a high chair. And I was convinced from those 2 dreams that we were going to get a baby, even after they had placed us with a sibling group of 3 that didn't include a baby. I still have the pacifier that I bought at Walmart because I was convinced that my mom was wrong. And I was like, I'm going to get this for the baby because nobody else is buying anything for him.
I wasn't buying anything for a baby.
Even when we did get the baby, we didn't use the pacifier. So I still have it.
But it was symbolic. It was symbolic.
So I saved it. And my aunt ended up having a baby girl that's a few months younger than the youngest that we adopted. She wasn't pregnant when I had the dream, I don't think.
No, and I had a dream too, but that's a whole nother story. But what is really cool, in case you didn't listen or read the book,
this very much parallels the last interview we did.
Right, and in case you didn't listen, yes, there was a baby. And we didn't find out until 2 weeks before our travel date that there was a baby. It was a younger sibling of the older 3 that they had never met, because when the older 3 were taken from the home and actually went straight to the hospital because they were very ill, their birth mother was pregnant at the time. And it wasn't until our attorney in Poland went to go interview the oldest 3, and I asked Damien, who was the oldest, who was 7 at the time, if he wanted to be adopted by this American couple, and it was Damien who said he remembered that his birth mom was pregnant. So our attorney went on an all-out search for this baby and found him.
And he was, what, a few miles away?
Yeah, 15 kilometers. Yep.
Yeah.
Because they were in Slayov and he was in Piotrków. And, it's funny, my memories, the really vivid ones that I have, do also, involve the phone calls, even though I wasn't ever the one to talk on the phone. And I don't know if that was because it was cemented in my memory that the adults around me were reacting to the phone call in an unusual way, if that's what made it stick even before I knew, like, why it was important. Because I also remember being in the house in Mannington when they called about the baby. Like,
Right.
I remember where I was in the house.
And it was, I remember the phone. It was yellow. The phone was yellow.
I think Grandma and Grandpa Guire were there. Grandparents were visiting when we got the call, because we were doing early Thanksgiving before we went to Poland, like over Thanksgiving.
Right. And and the interesting thing is, I think that the phone calls are extremely significant because when you are biologically pregnant, it's the labor you're waiting for. I'm going to cry.
Well, there's so many physical signs. Like, you're waiting on the pregnancy stick to show a positive.
Right.
And then you're waiting on blood results and,
to look pregnant.
yeah, like, but so much of that is stuff that you are personally in control of or present for, even if it's not technically in your control. You're the one that looks up or looks in the mirror and notices how you look different to yourself, or you feel how your back aches, or like there are all sorts of physical symptoms that are present in your own body that are signs of the next thing changing.
Right.
But with this, it was more like
it was all
the
external.
little bits you got were phone calls and paperwork.
And the pictures, like I still remember they were weird Polaroid film. And we got those in the mail, and I remember, I have no idea where I was when this happened, like who watched me, but I remember the day that you guys went to get your fingerprints taken for the background check.
Yeah.
And we were left with somebody else. I didn't even go on the trip with you, but I remember knowing that that's what you were going to do.
Right. Right. And back to the phone call, those are the signs and symptoms of adoption. You're waiting for the phone to ring.
Yeah.
You're just waiting, and that phone call is everything. And it's bringing that information. And the one thing I remember, I don't know if you remember this, Audrey, but we got a phone call in June that the courts were going to close down for the summer, and they wouldn't be back in session till the fall, so that there would be no way for us to be matched over the summer, and we just needed to wait until fall. And that summer felt like an eternity, because we knew there was not going to be any phone call at least until September.
Yeah, I don't remember that call at all.
Yeah.
So, let's keep going. And we've talked before about how the 3 biological Guire kids went on the first trip to Poland. So can you tell us what you remember about that?
I remember the flight. Like, I actually remember the traveling part. I don't know if Hunter does it all since he was so little. But I have memories of both of the flights and very vivid memories of, like, walking Chicago O'Hare for forever because that airport is so huge. And riding the airport tram between terminals.
Yes.
And I remember stuff like arriving in Poland and walking out and getting in the taxi that we were all crammed into like sardines.
Yeah, because that's a whole nother story.
I remember getting to the hotel and waiting in our room for a little bit. I have a memory of my dad trying to order Pizza Hut, but nobody spoke English, and they ended up they delivered one single medium pizza with nothing but anchovies on it. And drinking hot chocolate in the lobby while we talked to the lawyers. I remember meeting the lawyer and the interpreter and the lawyer who was in charge of, like, the case overall, even though we had an individual lawyer who worked with us more closely.
Right. She owned the whole firm.
Yeah.
And she came because it was, to her it was formality that you came to meet these people from America, and unfortunately it turned into a very tense situation, but...
Yeah, I knew that they weren't happy that we were there. Like, they were surprised, or hadn't been expecting the kids. And I remember the interpreter was, like, totally fine with it, or it seemed to be fine with it. He was a very happy person. And the other lawyer that was working with him was upset. He was very stressed. And, like, I remember him being stressed about that.
We talked about that before, about how they ended up being surprised that you guys were, like, well behaved, but they were so taken aback by the fact that you and Jerry wanted your kids to be a part of this process.
They were shocked.
That seems really crazy.
I remember going to eat dinner with them later that evening, and I don't know if this was, like, I'm pretty sure it was me because I was a weird kid. But I ended up at a table because they had little booths that would seat 4, and Mom and Dad ended up sitting with Hunter and Amory, and I ended up at the other table with the lawyer and the interpreter, and I talked to them the entire time.
You talked their ears off. Yes, you did. And they were very impressed by your intelligence because... we're trying not to say their names because in the book I changed the names to, just to protect them. But, they had, after dinner, they were very impressed with Audrey and all of her knowledge. Which,
so you're what made them okay with kids.
At Audrey's age and stage, she had more knowledge than common sense, so she made sure everybody around her knew that she had a lot of knowledge.
I was determined to make every adult my friend.
Yes,
I was not interested in other children.
That's true. That is very true.
That's very funny. So we've talked about, like, this is what made us cry in the last episode, but we've talked about, like, the agony you felt leaving the kids after this first trip to Poland, and how, like, your supposed month before you went back to bring them home turned into 5 months. And so, like, do you remember anything about that? Do you remember the tension of...
Yeah, I remember the kids being upset and stressed. And Damien didn't really believe that we were coming back.
Yep.
He was very, very angry. He thought we were lying to him. And my dad made him a calendar with the number of days that it would be before... we came back to get them, and that day was marked in red. And I remember him coming back to the rooms where we were staying very late at night in tears because some of the older kids had torn the calendar to pieces.
Yeah.
I remember being sad. I know that other people were sad and that other people were stressed. And I don't remember feeling as stressed as everyone else seemed to be. I think it's just because of the way my brain works. I had a completely different experience with parental trust up to that point.
Exactly.
So where Damien thought we were lying to them, I was like... There's no reason we wouldn't keep that promise. It's only going to be a month and a half. I remember being angry at the court system for putting us in a situation that, it was, they couldn't sign papers 6 weeks earlier. But, I remember at that point I had also become friends with a lot of the teens.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up.
Orphanage.
I was going to bring that up.
And I remember feeling more upset about leaving them because in my head I was like, we're going to come back and get my siblings in a month and a half.
But you're not going to come back and get them.
I'm never going to see, like, some of these other kids again.
Right.
And I, like, didn't necessarily want to adopt all of them and be their mom, but I was like, we should take all of them.
Right.
Because they were my friends. Like,
yes,
That's
and I
cool.
had that feeling too. In fact, I don't remember if I said this on the last episode, but there were
remember anything about.
There were 3 little ones that were siblings, and they had been diagnosed with reactive attachment disorder, which at that time was like nobody knew that you could get securely attached and find healing after that. So
it was a death sentence on a file.
Right, so nobody would adopt these kids, and I remember taking pictures of them. I brought them back, and I sent them to our coordinator with a letter and asked her if she would find them a family, and told her that we spent time with them, we met them, they were great kids, they weren't any different than the ones that we brought home as far as behaviors and attachment. And in fact, these kids ask us every day, will you adopt me?
Can you imagine if, like, people still looked at that disorder the same? I
Right.
mean,
Nobody
would be adopted.
Yeah. I remember
Nobody would
specifically those 3 kids. I think that I have so many memories packed into that 1 month we were in Poland that it pretty much massively outweighs, like, the rest of the year that I was, like, 12.
Mm-hmm.
And it even probably outweighs all of the things I remember from, like, 10 and 11 and 12. 13 was a bit different because we had new siblings, and that was
right.
a big learning curve for everybody. But just compared to, like, how often I think about things from my past, that 1 month represents so much of what I would say was, like, formative memories for me.
Yeah.
Because that was the first time that I'd been in a situation where I was exposed not just in theory, but in practice to so many things that I had never actually seen before. It wasn't just the poverty. It wasn't just the post-communism. It wasn't just being in an orphanage. It was like all of it at the same time. So things that seemed grossly unfair to me, but were problems that I could have solved at home.
Right.
Were things that were so wildly beyond my control there. And there are kids that even now, like, I remember their names and their faces, and I still think about them and wonder where they ended up. And I remember there was, because of Polish law at the time, they had a stipulation that if parents had voluntarily surrendered children, that they retained parental rights as long as they called every 6 months or made contact every 6 months. And a lot of that was because they were in a culture where people were having lots of kids while in poverty and would send older kids away to be able to feed the younger kids.
Right.
And I have a very vivid memory of one boy sitting outside the director's office sobbing, I don't want to talk to him, I don't want to talk to him, because his dad had called and he knew that 6 months cut him off from another year of being available to be adopted by anyone else. But that was the only contact he had with his dad.
Was that brother?
Yes, it was.
Yeah, I remember that.
David.
I remember that conversation, and that was the kid that spoke English really well
He spoke
and knew
English
all of
really
his
well.
geography.
He was really smart. His little sister played with Anya all the time, and they kept him home from school that day just because they knew his dad was calling, and that was the only contact that he got, and they were required by law to make him hold the phone.
Yeah, that was such a sad.
And I remember just being so angry, not even at just the court system, but at his dad, like, putting him in that situation where if he couldn't take care of them, he wouldn't let them go. And maybe there were other factors that I couldn't see then, but I didn't understand why if he actually cared, he wouldn't show up like actually visit in person.
Right,
Yeah.
and there were other circumstances that I knew more about because I had talked to the director about that circumstance, but it was still, I won't even go into it. It was all really messed up. But what Audrey is talking about, I think, is, when you go on a big missions trip and you are actually there in the culture and you have no control over anything, the government can throw you in jail, whatever. You're just totally out of your element. If you've never traveled outside of the country, you can't even imagine what we're talking about. But then take that mission trip, stay there for 5 weeks, which we did, and then go back and get some of the natives and bring them home with you, invite them into your house, and raise them as your own.
Because we weren't even going in, like, as a work project. Like, we were living at the orphanage.
Right.
Like, I woke up every day and had every meal with those kids. They didn't eat at school.
Yeah.
Right.
So that was breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day that we were eating with them. And I was talking with them. And, like, because we were living there, that was all of my free time.
Right, we did school during the day while they were at school, and then they got home, which they got home like at 1 o'clock.
It was 2.
Yeah.
1 or 2, yeah. Because we ate dinner really early, like as soon as they got home from school.
And, no, not right now. Oh, okay.
Good shoes.
Go
Okay.
quiet then.
You're getting... Okay, bud, you can get your shoes. Come get your shoes. You get your shoes.
Where are they? I
Where's your
think
boots?
I think that yours are in the kitchen.
Come on, Lyra.
Oh,
Your shoes are here.
folded that.
Yeah,
Yes,
it did.
it did.
All of that.
You need to ask Mom that.
Yeah. No. It's like we've never fed these kids before in their lives.
Fed them like
today.
5 times today.
Oh my god.
This non-commercial interruption was brought to you by the children
They want food.
who have been eating since we got here.
We can just cut that out.
I know.
Yeah.
That's why I'm still...
Where would you like to go back to?
You were talking about just like
Yeah,
living
so
the
we
same...
were living in the orphanage, and that became my daily routine. No, you didn't.
I don't see it anywhere.
You didn't. No, it's like a golden yellow color. So we were living in the orphanage. That became my daily routine. Was
Like 5 weeks is like a long time
Yeah,
to live in
especially when
another
you're a
country.
child.
and I know that, like, I know intellectually that I was old enough that 1 month shouldn't have been, like, a huge deal, but it was. And I have such strong memories attached to that whole season that I remember messaging, it was either Kathleen or my roommate at the time in college, Sarah, when I was walking around campus one November, and the temperature had just dropped like overnight. So I wasn't prepared for it, and I was walking across one of the bridges on the campus where I went to school, and this stiff wind just like blew across the bridge, and I remember thinking, I'm 19 years old. I was only there for a month. There is no reason why, like, cold weather should remind me specifically of Poland. Like, I have so many other winters that I've lived in other places.
Right.
But it did. Like, it's still, like, even now, I'll walk outside when it's cold sometimes and be like, oh, this feels like Poland. Or eat something and be like, oh, this tastes like something I had in Poland. And this is a small anecdote. I remember getting to the orphanage, and they had a little tray of cookies and coffee for us in the director's office because they were greeting us. We were saying hi, and we were waiting to go upstairs and meet the kids, but they wanted to talk to us first. And he had these cookies that had this strawberry icing on them, and I remembered what they were called, but I couldn't find them anywhere in the States. And I looked for years and years and years, and even like with the internet, I was like, I can't find these cookies anywhere. And I knew they were store-bought because I watched them take them out of the packaging. And it wasn't until probably 3 years ago that I like Googled it again, and I was like, oh, the name that I remembered as the name of these cookies is literally the Polish word for cookie. No wonder I've never been able to find them.
Oh my gosh. I remember the cookies, and I remember just they were so brightly colored. And I can just remember being so nervous and so excited about meeting the kids that I did not want to eat the cookies. And I didn't want to drink the coffee. And in America, that's perfectly acceptable. You know, you can just say, I don't want a cookie, or, I eat gluten-free, or I'm on a diet. But I remember our attorney leaning over and saying to me, you have to eat the cookies. It is not socially acceptable for you not to eat the cookies.
That was like my New Year's Day in an Egyptian's house.
So then I'm like shoving cookies in my mouth so we can go upstairs and meet the kids.
I've eaten enough cookies, man. I have the children.
How many cookies do I have to eat to get the kids? Is that enough? But another interesting thing about what Audrey's talking about, the weather, I'm the same way. I mean, and one of the things that I've learned about the brain is that whenever there's a trauma, and obviously staying in another country is a little bit of a trauma because you don't know the culture.
It traumatized me. I had pneumonia.
Right. There's trauma. And whenever you are in the middle of trauma, time literally, they've discovered this in the brain, feels like it's standing still. So one little trigger can take you back, and it takes me back to Poland every time there's a snowstorm or the wind blows, because another part of our story, which I don't know if I said this on the other podcast, but we literally thought we were prepared for snowy, cold weather because we're from the United States. But what we didn't realize is that in Poland, you walk everywhere. We had to buy new boots. Our boots were not sufficient. Like, we were not prepared.
Boots. I remember the store where we bought them. I remember trying them on. I remember what they look like. I remember my hat. I remember walking the path into Slough through the trees.
Yeah. And we had to buy the kids, the newbies. They didn't even have sufficient footwear, even though they were out every day. And they would go outside and play in the dark. Because it got dark at 3 o'clock.
It got dark so early in November. We were so far north.
Right.
And I do remember going outside and playing in the dark in the snow when it wasn't even dinner yet.
Yep.
I remember Gregory throwing a rock at my face. He was mad at me.
We could write a whole book about Gregory.
He was mad because we made him wear the coat.
Yep.
Because it was cold outside. And I took him outside and he was still so mad. We got outside and he was hurling rocks at me. And I dragged him back inside because he was hurling rocks and then stripping off mittens and hats and throwing them while I was dodging the rocks.
Can you talk a little bit about the parallels that you have noticed between Gregory and your son Pip?
Oh my goodness, yeah.
So, Gregory and my son Pip both have very adventurous spirits and literally no respect for boundaries of
or the physical laws of nature.
Their physical boundaries, like what their bodies can do, what their bodies are capable of, how powerful nature or objects are in comparison to them. Gregory is the kid that the first year we were in America tried to hurl himself from treetop to treetop like Tarzan.
Yes.
And fell and knocked all the wind out of him. And Peregrine Pip, my son, is 3 now, but when we moved into the house where we're living now, we have a big yard now with trees and stuff that we didn't have before. And I had to climb up our pine tree while pregnant to get him down because he just kept going. Like the other kids
Wasn't he just yelling, "Mama, I'm stuck"?
Yeah, he climbs that tree all the time. And the other kids will kind of check branches, and they're pretty good at figuring out where they should stop, or they'll just listen to me when I say that's high enough. Mm-hmm. If I yell at Peregrine, that's high enough, he yells, "No!" and keeps going. And I've had to go up to fish him out of the tree 20 feet in the air because he just keeps going. And he's the kid that would just literally take off at a sprint toward anything that looked interesting. Even now, and he doesn't. We joke that he's our first kid, even though he's the fourth, because he's the first hospital visit, the first ER trip, the first stitches. He's been the first for all of those, and it's not even because he's the fourth kid and I'm busy. It's just because he's the kid that will do things that none of the other ones even considered doing.
Yeah, and that's exactly how Gregory was, because remember when he first started riding the bike and he thought that the trampoline would stop him? So he almost decapitated himself.
He was trying to duck at the last minute to stay on the bike under the trampoline. And he didn't duck, and it caught him across the neck.
Oh my gosh.
And that's 100% something Pip would do.
Don't you get him?
This is fun.
I just need to be outside.
Okay, you need to go get clean ones. No,
Good thing Gabe is an editing genius.
Sorry, he's butt naked saying, "I need to be outside."
We should keep that part in.
He was stopped. He's apprehended.
Is that too funny?
And even when Pip was a baby, I remember correctly that you said that he looked like Gregory.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah.
He looks like Gregory more than any of the others do. And it's funny because when I look at my kids, and I don't know if it's something in the brain, the way that I interpret expressions because of familiarity, but each of my kids, to me, looks like a different one of my siblings, but most of them look like the adopted siblings and not the biological ones.
I know. I think so too.
Yeah, I see my boys and I'm like, "You look like Raphael. Raphael makes that face all the time."
Right.
And they're tall and thin like Raphael.
Yeah.
Well, and this isn't really a part of the early adoption story, but it's definitely part of the adoption story because, Audrey, you've said to me before that just everything, watching your siblings trying to attach and their behavioral issues and all of the things that we went through trying to find out how to deal with fetal alcohol syndrome and diagnose Asperger's and all those sorts of things prepared you for your own family.
Yeah.
And what your own family looks like today.
I would tell people, I remember this still happens sometimes. I will tell people that my kids are on the spectrum. But it happened more often when I was saying that I think my boys are on the spectrum before they were diagnosed. And I would say that, and people would say things like, "Oh, I'm sorry," or "I don't think you really need to worry about that." And I would tell them, I'm not worried.
Right.
It's just a statement about how they interact with the world.
Right.
I don't feel like this is overwhelming because in some ways I've done this already.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
I'm actually on the spectrum myself, and so some of the things that I remember from when I was really little were ways that I feel like I understood my adopted siblings in ways that other people didn't.
Exactly.
And I still remember, this was much later, but one of the kids was in the habit of stripping all the sheets off his bed every time he went to sleep.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember Kathleen calling me and talking to, like, it wasn't just about that, but it had come up in the course of a conversation.
One of your kids?
No.
No.
One of my siblings.
One of your siblings.
One of my siblings was taking the sheets off his bed every night to sleep. Mm-hmm. And she was like, I don't know why he's doing that. He's going to ruin the mattress. And I didn't even have to think about it. I was like, Mom, it's because he doesn't like how the cotton feels. But the mattress is that really silky material. Like, he probably couldn't tell you that, but it's a sensory thing.
Right. And Audrey, if you haven't figured this out, Audrey has always been one of these people that will speak her mind, regardless of your age and stage and authority in life. So there were a lot of times when she was young, like she was a teenager, and she would say, Mom, the reason that child is doing that is because blah, blah, blah. And she would fill me in on that, and I would have to really stop and listen and think about it because, you know, when you're the parent, sometimes your first response is, be quiet, you don't know what you're talking about. But she did know what she was talking about. She had this amazing intuitive ability because of the way that she perceived the world, that she could see things the way that they saw things. So that was always, you know, a very annoying great help.
I know this is a bit of a transition, but just thinking about like the way that I see the world and the way that I understood them because of that makes me think about the fact that there were a lot of ways in which adoption did change the way that I viewed the world. And I know that there are people who have older kids who have asked me before when they find out that I'm the oldest, do you ever regret it? Do you ever wish that your parents hadn't adopted? Do you wish that they had waited until you were in college? Like, because they're not asking, you know, do you think your siblings are valuable? They're asking, am I going to do something
affect you?
I regret to my kids that I already have by not waiting or being patient in some way. And I think that there were times when it was difficult, but that difficulty was a good thing. I remember telling my dad, I was probably 19 or 20, so I was in college. I wasn't even living at home anymore. But I could just so clearly see the trajectory of where I was headed pre-adoption. And in retrospect. And I remember telling him, I don't regret it because I think I would have been a far more selfish, self-obsessed person. I would have been on a more self-destructive path. And that was such a major way, even if it was uncomfortable, of making me look outside myself. So we didn't adopt for me, but the ways that it benefited me as a person, as a Christian, the way that it changed how I saw God's love or forgiveness or connection far outweighed the times that it was
The way
difficult.
you could have been selfish.
Yeah, like it was definitely something that I don't think of as I wish we would have done it differently. I think the way that we adopted in the age that I was, God worked out so well that it stirred a lot of compassion and empathy in me that I maybe would have been able to develop eventually, but it would have been at a different time in a different way, and I don't know how many years I would have felt like I'd lost not having that by waiting until I was older to see it.
Yeah. that reminds me of, like, we've already talked about parenthood
Yeah.
in our day today, but, like, you remember the last episode where Hattie tells Max that she was better for having him as a brother?
Yeah, and that's how I feel, like, that it made me a better person. Maybe that was because there were times that I had to depend on Christ more. Mm-hmm. But I think a lot of times it was ways that issues that my siblings were not directly responsible for, that were the result of things that had been done to them or not been provided for them at an early age. Those were the things that we had to overlook or give grace to, or that were harder to deal with. And it changed my perspective on, like, what I was capable of forgiving as a human. And the limitless grace and opportunities that Christ gave me. I know that a lot of times that people say that they don't realize really how selfish they were until they had a baby.
Yeah.
And they go through this process of, like, I thought I was a good person, but my temper is actually very, very short. And I'm very impatient. And I didn't know this until I was having these demands on me all the time. I know that I had some of that when I first started having my own kids. But because I was older when we adopted, I feel like I went through a version of that crucible at an earlier point. Yeah. Where I thought I was, like, a decent person, and then I was like, oh no, I'm pretty terrible. Like, I'm not good at this on my own.
Yeah. Wow. Those are, like, some really... Because I'm learning in, like, mid to late 20s that a lot of people aren't doing soul searching until they're, like, 50, 60. And I'm doing it now, like, half that age. But you're talking about, like, having done soul searching as a 13-year-old.
I feel like I've always been one of those people that was, like, a decade ahead of, not necessarily in maturity all the time, but...
like, self-awareness.
And, yeah, self-awareness or whatever I was going through. And I think that's tied up in, like, I've never been one of those people that was upset about getting older. Mm-hmm. I know that that's, like, a new thing to be upset about having to be an adult and do adult things. And I was like, I can't wait to get there. And people would say, you're going to miss this. You're going to regret being a grown-up. You're going to wish you were a kid again. And you know what? I honestly never have. I am glad that I can do adult things. I don't love all of it, but I've never resented the fact that I was getting older.
I think the only time I do is when I'm sick and I just want to be taken care of.
Right. Well, and I would never say that about your personality. I mean, even when you were little, you were constantly telling us that you just wanted to be older and you wanted to do everything by yourself. When Audrey was 4, she went out to the garage and took the training wheels off her bike and just started riding it.
I was ready for a car.
She was.
Oh, boy. It sounds like my child. He tries to talk me into letting him drive the car. He's almost 3. And I'm like, you don't have a driver's license. He goes, I have a driver's license.
This is a segue, so we can cut it if we need to. But I had a friend growing up who was, like, terrified of the police. And one day he decided there was this season of his life where he thought he was Superman. And one day his mom caught him on the edge of the roof about to jump off because he had convinced himself at 6 that if he just jumped hard enough, he'd be able to fly. And she kept telling him, you can't do that, you're going to fall. And he kept saying, no, I can fly, I know I can. So she finally had to tell him that he didn't have his flying license and that the police would come arrest him if he flew without it. And that's what got him to get down.
Oh my gosh. That's crazy. Oh boy. I don't know how. I can't believe that I'm only parenting almost 3-year-old. Like, that might be my future. Well, we're really glad that you were able to join us, Audrey, and I really love the perspectives that you had of the adoption.
Well, thank you for having me on the podcast. I'm excited to finally get to do it.
Yay! Yeah. We came to you, and we really enjoyed it. But, yeah, thanks for joining us here at the Whole House Podcast, and we'll see you next time.
We're so glad you could join us here for the Whole House Podcast. Please subscribe, and if you give us a review, we might pick our favorite and send you a prize. Please remember to like the Whole House Facebook page and follow us on Instagram at _whole_house. And please sign up with your email on our website, thewholehouse.org, to be notified when new things are happening here at the Whole House. Thanks so much for listening.